Hi everybody, and hope you can hear me okay. We're having a few technical problems, but welcome to this session that I think is a really important one in terms of us thinking about how do we engage young people with the net zero agenda. Now, I need to address the elephant in the room, and that is that we're talking about young people, and we've started with a 55-year-old man talking to you. And we apologize for that, because actually it is really important that we have young people's voices actually in these kinds of sessions. And for those of you that saw an earlier version of the program for this particular session, we did have planned to have Scarlett Westbrook with us, who is this fantastically inspiring young person who's a climate activist and also a journalist. But sadly, Scarlett had to pull out yesterday. So unfortunately, we can't have Scarlett with us. But the work that the three of us have been involved with doing for many years has involved us working with young people a lot. So what we're going to try and do is be an advocate for their voices as much as we possibly can. So how this session is going to go is slightly different to the others that you've perhaps been part of so far. With Scarlett not being with us, so we've got a bit of time for myself just to set a few things up, and then we're going to be able to benefit from the insight of Lou Brook from Plymouth City Council, who's going to tell us a little bit about what the council have been doing around young people and climate action. And then we'll have lots of time to benefit from the research and the insights of Alison, who's going to be talking about youth voices in sustainability and climate education. So there will be a time at the end for some questions, so we'll be able to have lots of interaction via that facility. Let me just try and share my screen now. Let's see if this works, so that we can just I can just try and set the scene for us. Hopefully you can see that. So what I wanted to do was just offer us a few sort of starting points for our session together. And the first one is this, that I think we must make sure that we don't frame young people incorrectly. And I think that in the work over the last 30 years with young people that I've been involved with, what our research has found is that they are very concerned about the manifold range of local and global issues, including the climate emergency, that they are far from apathetic. And one of the things that we misinterpret their apathy about is because they have very limited space for agency and for action. But if we give them the safe space to risk saying what they genuinely think about what's going on in their communities, in their neighbourhoods, in their world, what we find is that they are deeply concerned and worried about a whole range of different issues. So I think it's vitally important when we're thinking about how do we engage young people with the net zero agenda, that we have the approach of realising that they are already engaged, they are already bothered, they are already feeling like this matters to them. And that gives us a different starting point for our conversations and our facilitation of their action responses. The next starting point we just wanted to propose for our time together this afternoon is that we need to engage young people as much with notions of active hope as we do with the narratives of multiple points of crisis. And I think it's really important that we get this balance right at this time. I've been involved in all sorts of educational work where what we've started to realise is that actually in exposing our young people to the enormity and the global scale of these interconnected challenges, that we are actually nurturing a sense of despair rather than possibility and the need for urgent action. So I think we need to find ways to work where we are really constructing pathways of hope for our young people to feel like they are part of. And there's something I just wanted to read that a really inspiring sustainable educator, David Orr, wrote when he was looking at this very issue. And he said, hope, authentic hope, can be found only in our capacity to discern the truth about our situation and ourselves, and summon the fortitude to act accordingly. So I feel that what we need to do with our young people as much as possible is equip them for taking action for themselves. And that brings me to the next starting point that we, again, just wanted to put up as food for thought, which is around this idea that increasingly in sustainable education spaces, we're recognizing the need for the curriculum and the teaching and learning approach to be competency focused rather than just knowledge focused, and to be thinking about how are we creating the opportunity to draw out these kinds of competencies from our students so that they are equipped to be able to take the net zero agenda forwards. So how are we developing their systems thinking, where they're able to recognize and understand complex systems of interconnection and relationship? How are we developing their anticipatory competencies so that they can understand and evaluate multiple futures, possible, probable, and desirable? How are we developing their normative competency, being able to negotiate sustainability values, principles, goals, and targets in a context of conflicts of interest and trade-offs? How are we developing their strategic competency to collectively develop and implement innovative actions? How are we developing their collaboration competency, where they can understand and respect the needs, perspectives, and actions of others, and realize the value of interdisciplinary perspectives on these complex, manifold challenges? How are we developing critical thinking competency, where we're able to help them to question norms, practices, and opinions? And how are we developing that self-awareness competency to reflect on their own role in the local and global community? And that all combines up to developing this final eighth competency of the integrated problem-solving ability to develop viable, inclusive, and equitable solution options. So I'm hoping that that has helped to set the scene. And I'm hoping that you've been able to hear most of that whilst I've been talking. And now what I'm going to do is hand over to Lou, who is just going to be able to give us the benefit of her insight from her work with Plymouth City Council. So Lou, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Just bear with me 1 second. That's not as nice. I'm unable to unmute.
I can hear you, Lou.
Can you? Okay, sorry everybody. Yeah. Okay, so can everybody see the slides?
Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks. Okay, I'll get cracking. So I'm Lou Brook. I'm a net zero strategy coordinator with Plymouth City Council, and I've been with the council for just over a couple of years now. Now within my remit is engagement, and it's something I started looking at when I started the role, when I was tasked to consider how do we engage the people of Plymouth, including young people, young and old, to take concrete action to reduce their carbon footprint. So at the outset, we considered that there are a whole load of considerations and levers at our disposal to draw on. So, for example, language. We needed to think around what language we use, because language can create lots of barriers and exclusion, and it needed to be accessible. Participation. So, we know that people don't act because you tell them to, but actually they're more inclined to act if they genuinely feel part of something. And so participation shapes action, and that sits alongside the normative effect. We're very social creatures rather than those who enjoy solitude in the main. And so our behaviour is unconsciously shaped by these social norms and what we think is judged to be normal, what we think people like me do, and equally we even more influenced by those people we trust and look up to, so trusted messages and influences. So there were all these considerations that we were thinking about at the outset. But then we had to acknowledge that when considering climate change, it's even further nuanced. Many of you will have heard of this whole tragedy of the commons, in the fact that we find ourselves kind of caught between acting for self-interest versus acting for the greater good. For example, jumping the car is quick and convenient for me, but actually, if we all jump in our cars, we pollute the air for everyone. And conversely, if we don't all jump in our cars, we can create cleaner air for everyone. And alongside that, we know that everybody's sense of agency is really impacted by what they feel everyone else is doing. And we heard that from Emily in the Young Foundation this morning. If we feel that no one else is acting for the greater good, then why should I bother? And that played into how our approach of how we thought we should approach the engagement piece. So we decided that on the basis of that, we would throw the rule book out, the rule book that says appeal to niches rather than try to appeal to the mass when you can't land it with anyone. And we have felt that actually we need to focus on this collective endeavour. And what we are working towards is trying to establish a place-based norm in Plymouth, that in Plymouth we're all taking action for a brighter future. And that's captured by this mantra, if you like, together for a better Plymouth. So as part of that, we established the brand Climate Connections, a brand that everybody can get behind and coalesce underneath. And our first instance was to set up a web platform for collaboration, and it sets out that overall game plan for how Plymouth can get to net zero. But the key bit is engaging the whole city. So our approach to young people is to see them as part of a connected whole. So while we've got and we tailor things to young people, we are approaching it collectively and trying to also showcase just the wealth of activity that is going on in the city. So in developing that brand that everyone can get behind, we took great pains to make sure that it was really positive in a world where a lot of messages are quite scary and off-putting. And we also endeavoured, it's deliberately not green, it's deliberately all colours. It's actually taken from the Sustainable Development Goals originally, and it was designed to be bright and accessible, a brand that could appeal to all. And we were also acknowledged that people feel preached to, and that isn't necessarily the best approach to try and get people on board and to go with you. So we took an inquisitive approach and tried to frame things around posing questions that would ask people to reflect and tap into people's aspirations for a brighter future. So this year we have got a whole load of pilots trying lots of different things, and we are trying to raise the visibility of the scale of action in the city from ordinary people, including our young people. So we developed a campaign called Local Climate Legend, and in that campaign we went out to ask the public to nominate their ordinary heroes, their local climate legend, and with different categories. So we had a category for young people, also schools, business, resident and community, and as part of framing that, we hit the streets to talk to people around what actions they are taking. And we captured that in Vox Pop style, so that, for example, young people could see other young people talking about what they do. Now I'm going to try and see if this next one will show you a clip. I think the audio might actually work this time.
Well, if there's like 8 billion people on the planet, if I make small changes and everyone does the same, that'll add up to make quite a big change total.
You know, I don't buy much. Like this sweater I'm borrowing from someone else. Fantastic. Borrow, don't buy.
I cycle a lot, yeah, rather than use the car.
Now I hope you were able to hear that, but at least you could see the subtitles, and that was a reel that we used to push out through socials with a number of others to try and show people what ordinary people were thinking on the streets. So the next strand, this is actually this Saturday, is the Big Green Trail. Now, when we're talking about active travel, you know, traditionally as a council, we often go out and last year, for example, there was an event where we invited people to come and talk about all of the different options, but people don't really want to talk about transport, funnily enough. So we decided to deploy this year a different approach and make it more fun and participatory, and invite people to actually travel themselves, so cycle and walk and scoot and roll to different activities across the city. And it would have the double win of those activities across the city being hosted by all of our stakeholders in the city, our fantastic community groups, and other organisations like the Marine Aquarium, the Box, Theatre Royal. So it would have that dual effect of having people participate, but also be able to hear all of the good work that is going on in the city. But we also recognise that there are barriers. Cost and travel are two barriers that are always cited by young people. So we've wrapped around that free bus travel for under 16s with a paying adult, plus 2 hours of free barrel bikes, which is very popular with the over 16s. So we will see how that goes. That's actually this Saturday, so please do come along. The other thing that we've trialled this year, and our first event was earlier in May, we've got another one in July, is a climate mingle. So we recognise that in addition to knowledge sharing activities like this one we're in today, which is quite formal and and plays an important role, there's also a role for an informal bringing together of different audiences. So the climate mingle does just that. It's designed to be very inclusive. It's designed to share the lived experiences of organisations and people in the city who are on their net zero journey, but not just share their positive experiences, but also their challenges. And the idea is that if we create that informal, formal opportunity for people to share, that we can hopefully cross-fertilise ideas and come up with new ideas and be able to reach out to other people. And it was really exciting to have young and old all mingling together in that first event. The other aspect of it is to have it roaming across the city so that everybody does feel included, because people are connected to different venues in different places. So in some cases it will be in a business. We started this in a plant-based Cosmic Kitchen, which is a restaurant, and it was next to the social enterprise think tank and Borrow Don't Buy. But it helps to foster inclusivity, at least we hope so. So we have got some dedicated activities for young people, and we've just set up a Youth Climate Ambassador programme, and that's to support those of our young people who Paul's already mentioned. That there was actually quite a lot of people who are already motivated, and it's designed to kind of support them, to help give them a voice, and to help them be able to express that voice beyond, and also help in those areas of climate anxiety. So that's an after-school club. We've been meeting once a month, and we've been wrapping around activities such as media workshops and and helping them to create films and surface social media ideas, and the intention to grow and build that network with our young people from 11 to 18. And lastly, this one's just work in progress. Another strand of activity is working with schools, and we are developing materials for Key Stage 2, this is, so largely primary, to help our teachers be able to share Plymouth-specific information, and to help our young people be able to shape their own spaces in their schools and influence what goes on in their schools. And we're also planning a celebratory event for autumn, but this is actually not even being seen by people, so you're very privileged to see that. So really it's just lots of pilot activities this year, and watch this space.
Thanks, Lou. That's so inspiring to just hear about all of the range of different things that the council are taking forward. It's great. Okay, so now we can move on to Alison and hear a little bit more about her really groundbreaking research around young voices, youth voices to do with climate education. So thanks, Alison, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. I'll just share my slides. Okay, just bear with me a moment. Okay, so we've heard already quite a bit about the importance of a place-based approach, and we've heard just now from Lou about the exciting work that's taking place in Plymouth. I'm going to be talking a bit more about the national context, and talking about some of the findings from a piece of research that I recently carried out with the British Science Association, which was investigating young people's views about climate change, education, and sustainability in secondary schools. And as we heard earlier on this morning from Emily from the Young Foundation, a place-based approach is really important to tackling the climate crisis, and also the move to a just transition. And we know that young people are, many young people are really sort of concerned with issues of climate justice. And also they feel a lot of anger and anxiety, as we'll hear later on when I show a short video clip of young people expressing their views about climate education. They feel a lot of anger and anxiety about feeling ill-equipped to deal with the climate crisis. Education is clearly crucial, but it's not that simple. You know, as we know, just giving people more and more information doesn't necessarily lead to behaviour change. It's very complex, and this is why I'm arguing that the education system needs to have some radical change in order for these important things to take place. But young people themselves clearly can't be expected to solve the climate crisis. I think where the role of young people comes in particularly is in terms of placing more pressure on politicians, on industry for those kind of structural changes that need to occur. Also in terms of the future workforce, and in terms of intergenerational effects. So, young people putting climate change on the agenda for their parents, for their grandparents. And many of the things that I'm talking about this afternoon don't just apply to young people, they apply to the public in general. So I'm just going to, this is just an overview of what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon. I will briefly explain a little bit about the background to the British Science Association research that I carried out, and present some of the sort of major findings. The report itself was launched at the House of Lords in June 2023. And if you're interested, I'll give you a link later on to the actual report, which goes into a lot more detail than I can provide today. So just in terms of background then, in April 2022, the Department for Education published their Sustainability and Climate Change Education Strategy. And although we have now got the introduction of the GCSE Natural History, which is optional, and the National Nature Park, which, you know, I very much welcome. And, you know, the Department for Education stated in the strategy that climate change will be put at the heart of education. Unfortunately, I think it could go much further, and climate change currently is still marginalised in the school curriculum, as we'll see from the findings that we're going to discuss in a moment. Also, it's concerning that, as we've heard before, timelines are slipping to meet net zero by 2050. And there is a major skill shortage for the green economy. The UK is facing a green skills gap of 200,000 workers. And green careers education is one of the areas that I think needs to be expanded. Young people have very little awareness of what a green career might be beyond, you know, the obvious roles. And just to move on to say a little bit about the survey that we carried out. This was commissioned by OnePoll. It was a national representative survey, including 1,000 respondents aged between 14 and 18 right across the UK. And this was supplemented by 2 in-depth exploratory workshops, again with young people aged between 14 and 18 right across the UK in March 2023. And the young people were split up into separate age groups, and which enabled smaller focus group discussions to take place. And one of the things that was very evident from this survey, that there was a very strong appetite for climate education amongst the respondents. So 72% said they would welcome the opportunity to learn more about climate change in school. And a similar percentage also agreed that it needs to be taught across the curriculum in all subjects. We also wanted to ask them about the level of concern about different issues, including climate change, but also other issues around things like mental health, the economy, and so on and so forth. And it was encouraging to see that climate change was the top issue that young people said that they were concerned about. They could select more than one issue, but climate change came right up the top as one that they were that was most mentioned out of all of these issues, which was really encouraging. But interestingly, there were some significant variations between the age groups. So the 14-year-olds were less likely to welcome the opportunity to learn more about climate change in school. Also, the 14-year-olds were less likely to strongly agree that the climate change information they get at school is relevant to their lives. And they were less likely to agree that teachers are very knowledgeable about climate change compared to the 18-year-olds. And there's a number of reasons why this might be. It could be maybe the Greta effect, in that you know, the 18-year-olds would have grown up with you know, hearing a lot about Friday for Future and Greta Thunberg. Also, it may be that 14-year-olds, perhaps have less developed views at that age and perhaps a little bit more reticent to strongly agree with particular statements, perhaps being a little bit more on the fence. We also asked them to let us know when they last remembered learning about climate change. And a large percentage of the young people said that they had learnt about climate change within the last 6 months, which was good. But as we'll see in a moment, primarily they came across climate change in GCSE science or GCSE geography, which is optional. So a large number of young people are not learning about climate change outside of those subject areas. We also asked them about the activities that they'd taken part in over the last month. And here the findings kind of mirror some of the findings from national surveys of the public in general, which often suggest that people are much more likely to be engaged in relatively small scale actions around things like recycling their rubbish, but perhaps are less likely to have done more radical, made more radical changes in their life, such as changing their diet. Also interesting to see that relatively small numbers of the participants said that they have been engaged in influencing local politicians and businesses. But those people who had engaged in those activities, as you might expect, tended to be slightly older. So who do young people say they're most likely to go to for climate change information? Well, the top two were teachers and scientists, and we know that teachers are a really very important source of information about climate change for young people. If you look down the list, it suggests that young people said that they were less likely, much less likely to go to community leaders or politicians for information, which is interesting. I should say as well that this British Science Association work recruits young people who have an interest in science. So if this survey had been done using a different kind of population, then perhaps scientists wouldn't have figured so prominently. So moving on then to look at some of the key findings from the focus groups. Just got some quotes here from the young people about their experiences of climate education. And one of the things that really came out very strongly from the focus group discussions was that young people felt that the teaching was very much constrained within GCSE science and geography. And the problem that young people tended to be taught, to pass the exam. So very little discussion beyond the exam specification, as you can see here in the comments that young people made in the focus groups. So I'd rather have more education about climate change outside the GCSE specification, because people don't get interested in these things when you have to learn it for an exam. Another thing that was very striking, both from the survey and from the focus groups, was that secondary school teaching tended to focus very narrowly on the impacts of climate change, and there was relatively little discussion of the causes and solutions to climate change. And we know from a whole variety of studies and pieces of research that young people experience a lot of anxiety about the climate crisis. And no doubt this lack of focus on solutions and positive messaging within the education system is a contributory factor. And, you know, they mentioned how the teaching tended to kind of steer away from considering the wider socio-economic and political context, which they found was actually, you know, unhelpful. And you have this comment here that one of the young people made. It was a really odd mixture of like massive, large-scale things that we have no part in, but also really small things that you know, don't necessarily impact reversing the damage of climate change on a big enough level. So things about, you know, turning off lights, that kind of thing, rather than, you know, larger level things that have more of an impact. Within the workshops, we also asked young people to, well, prior to the workshops, we asked young people to come up with images that they sourced that for them represented climate change. And then in the workshops, the young people were asked to actually describe the images that they'd selected. And what was very clear here was that virtually all of the young people chose images of catastrophic destruction, and when they were describing them, they, you know, were using words like "end of the world as we know it." And in fact, only one young person selected an image showing climate change solution. So it was all very kind of negative, and I think this was very, very telling, as you can see from this word cloud, you know, that destruction, scary, melting ice caps and so on and so forth. And in fact, a lot of the young people did actually choose stereotypical images of polar bears on melting ice caps. We also asked the young people what kind of vehicles would be most useful that could be used in class to convey the climate crisis. So would it be films, documentaries, would it be real life projects, and so on and so forth. And what was clear here was that we really need to ensure that climate education connects with young people's everyday lives, so that it's much more tangible. What was clear from the piece of research that we carried out was that young people were experiencing climate change as a far away thing that was removed from their everyday lives. And this is where I think, you know, the importance of a place-based approach comes in, that I mentioned at the beginning. Real life projects will be particularly helpful, I think, connecting with issues within young people's, you know, where they live in their community, and being able to see how actions make a larger impact on their own community. And what came across in the survey and in the focus groups was that young people are feeling quite disempowered, and what they want is more of a voice. They want agency and empowerment, as comes across from you know, these comments here. Please teach us beyond specification. Climate change goes beyond marks in a test, so teach us this, teach us the power we hold, even against the government, and how we can influence policy. So there was a real sense of disempowerment, and yet young people wanted to get engaged with, you know, trying to make a real difference and trying to influence wider policy. And then, in addition to the British Science Association research that I carried out, I also carried out a survey of teachers' attitudes towards climate education, and this was via the Teacher Tap app. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but it's an app that poses particular questions every week that teachers can engage with. And I could only actually afford to ask one question. And so the question that I asked them was whether or not laws should be passed to integrate climate change and sustainability throughout the primary and secondary curriculum. And this was to a representative cross-national, this was a representative cross-national survey of both primary and secondary school teachers, so over 8,000. And there was very strong support for this. Slightly over half agreed that laws need to be introduced. And this was across the board, so both primary and secondary school teachers. And what was particularly encouraging was that there were really high levels of support for introducing laws amongst young teachers. So over 60%, over 2/3 of young teachers believe that these laws need to be passed. Slightly less, 41% of teachers aged 50 and above agreed with that. Also, it was interesting that maths teachers were the least likely to agree, humanities teachers were the most likely to agree. And as perhaps you might expect, head teachers were the least likely to agree. You know, obviously head teachers are more likely to be over the age of 50 as well. And also more likely to be male. So some of these categories overlap. So I just want to show you a clip from, short clip from a video showing some young people who took part in a piece of research that I was engaged with. Actually, it was just before the British Science Association piece of research, but I think it really captures young people's views about climate change education and feelings of lack of agency and disempowerment, but also how much they want change to occur. So hopefully you will be able to hear sound on this okay.
And their political party, and they know that if they keep England financially stable, or whatever country this government is, that they will be more likely to get re-elected, because focusing a lot more on climate change will probably have negative financial effects, which in the short term will make their party perhaps more unpopular.
Yeah. While Greta may create a figurehead for us, I also think it's kind of saddening that a child had to step out of school and go around the world to tell politicians what they were doing wrong because they didn't see the problem that was staring them in the face.
I think even now she's only seen as a symbol by politicians. They're not actually listening to her. They just think it's, you know, they just call her amazing and wonderful for doing it. But like she says, there's just a lot of empty words kind of being thrown at her and at us. Yeah, I think the general consensus among governments is, oh, the kids will sort it out when they're older, and they're kind of almost waiting for us to grow up and be able to sort it out when it will be too late at that point. We can't really sort it out because there is no time for us to grow up and accumulate wealth. So it's a nice idea, I suppose, that we will solve it, but I think they're definitely going to have to start that change. We can't really do that.
Media, they have a lot of responsibility in terms of making sure that, you know, they understand that, for example, when youth go on the streets, the message that we are passing is not that we are in the streets, it's that we want you to focus on the urgency behind climate change. And so whatever ways we decide to bring the subject up, media is really crucial for media to understand that it's about the message and not the way we want to bring the message. And they got that responsibility to put that forward, to put that message forward. And they've got the responsibility also to engage citizens. When you talk about the consequences of climate change, you just look at floods or fires, and then you just show that on the news without really telling anything more than the fact that it's happening. Well, that's just saying facts, cool. But what about you explain to us, how is that linked to our everyday life? How can actually our consumption of every single day here in Europe is actually linked to the deforestation or the fires in the Amazon forests? Links is about reality. It's about showing the full reality that climate change is not only about this one flood or this one thing, it's a whole system. And we can be part of the change. We can be part of the solution.
Okay, so just to quickly conclude, I think we're running out of time. I think it's very clear then that climate change education needs to break out of the current subject silos. There's a need for an emphasis on solutions, and also, I haven't really talked about this too much, but media literacy and critical thinking skills, and a place-based project-led approach rooted in experiential learning that's locally relevant to individual students, I would argue is most effective. And what teachers really need is much more training, support and resources. And whilst, this requires a commitment to providing ring-fence funding, I think, the costs of not doing this are infinitely greater. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alison. That was fantastic. Okay. Let me just see if I can get my video to work, and we'll see whether that that kicks in okay. It might not. We'll see how we go. I think we've also got a colleague of mine, Paul Harbour, with us. So if I continue to have problems with the connection, it might be that Paul takes over this last bit of just anchoring our Q&A session, but we'll see how we go. So thank you for engaging so richly in the chat space on the Spot Me platform. It's really encouraging to see that depth of engagement around this really important and vital area. There's a couple of questions that I thought might be useful to frame, perhaps for Lou, if that's okay. And that was a question that William was asking about: is there an age limit to the youth climate activities? Because I think William is still very much a young person in my book, but I think was 29, is that right, William? So was keen to be involved in those sorts of things. So is there an upper age limit? And then also there was a comment from Jasmine that was talking about research from the Youth Hub that indicates young people want more face-to-face and in-person opportunities to physically meet rather than it just being digitally based. And I wondered, Lou, whether the work that the council's doing, how much of that's face-to-face and how much of that is digitally based. Is that all right, just to get a couple of comments on those?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, for Will, we have actually got a climate ambassador scheme for everyone, which you're welcome to be part of. And Climate Connections, you are also very welcome. It's open to everybody in the city of Plymouth to contribute to that, and there are mechanisms to do that. So you'd be very welcome. The Youth Climate Ambassador scheme is for school level, so that is under 18s. But as I say, Climate Connections is for everyone, so very open from that perspective. In terms of the face-to-face angle, it's fair to say that until this year, we have largely, although myself as an officer and a few of my colleagues do engage face-to-face, there's only a few of us. So therefore, through digital means, we're able to reach more people more quickly. So we have focused quite a lot on social media previously. This year I've got another officer who has joined us, and that's enabled us to do more. So as you can see, in terms of the activities I shared, like the climate mingle and just the climate ambassador schemes and the climate advisor schemes, we have got a lot more face-to-face things going on, but it is limited by capacity. I mean, I only shared some of the things that we're doing. We're also trying to go into the community through our political system, working with our members to try to help locally to see whether that is a good way to help people surface their own actions, to work out what they can do and support them in that process. So and I also know that Jasmine from a skills point of view is working hard on that too. So we are very conscious of that, the face-to-face side, and we are doing what we can with little resources, but that is why we are also trying to bring everybody together. So for example, the Big Green Trail is about trying to connect everyone with the wider community, because it's not just the council, it's not just the university. We've got lots of active stakeholders who can help and support young people to develop their agency. And I think by being more joined up, we can create greater capacity to be able to engage and do more. So I don't know whether that answers the question.
No, that's great. That's great, Luke. Thank you. So again, what I just want to thank everyone for is just that richness of sharing. So thank you, Abby, for your comments around active hope. And Richard shared a really lovely quote that I just want to read out. Hope is created not through policy, but through agency. I think that certainly is a key theme of our session this afternoon. There's been some really helpful sharing of resources. So thank you for doing that. And there's some links that have gone into the chat space, so do check those out. One of the things that has been discussed quite a bit in the chat space is around the curriculum and how we need to do so much more. And there's a little conversation going on around the Department for Education's sustainability strategy. And just to say that they are doing it by region. And unfortunately, the Southwest was not the first region to be given priority. So there are things going on and being taken forward. And actually, myself and the university are trying to act as a bit of a hub point for that. So if you are interested in helping us to support schools, please do reach out and email myself. And we're trying to build on Alison's excellent research to just support staff in schools with how they can do it in a non-tokenistic way, which I think is a key point from your comment. And I just wanted to perhaps close on this last question, and perhaps we go to Alison, if that's all right, Alison, and then if it's time, perhaps Lou, you could come up with a response as well. But how do the speakers think we can empower young people without tokenizing them? What would you feel is the key thing we need to do next, Alison?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I think young people need to be kind of approached where they are. So I think, we need to engage with what motivates young people. And as I said at the beginning of my talk, I don't think we can expect young people, we shouldn't put the burden of responsibility for solving the climate crisis on young people. Clearly, young people will be in important positions of power and will, be taking up green careers. But, we need to act now. We can't wait, for sort of 20 years' time. So I think, it's really important that we engage young people, but we can't expect them to solve things. And, many young people, as we've heard, already actually are engaged. They just need the tools to actually, have more agency, which I think is where, not just the education system, but other, agencies can help as well. you know, so that young people do feel that they've got a voice and they can genuinely be involved in, you know, the debate that's affecting, you know, their futures more so than, you know, us older people.
Thanks, Alison. What do you think, Lou?
I think there's just so much in there. There's so much to unpack, isn't there? So we did have a young, one of our climate ambassadors, a young person, and invited them into the exec group to sit on the executive board for the Net Zero Partnership. And he was a really motivated young chap, and that, you know, that was very empowering for him. But actually, it's not enough to have one young voice in a room full of adult, largely male voices. You know, actually, you need to have some balance to enable young people to be properly heard and taken seriously. So I think we probably need to work on that and how we bring that balance and how we enable young people's voices to be heard in that political system. But certainly in terms of what we're trying to do, then I think that we probably need to do that at a grassroots level. And I still firmly believe in it not being just an isolated youth thing. I think it needs to be young people alongside old people. And, you know, it tends to be the polar. There's young people and old people. And then, you know, actually there's so much value in bringing everybody together in a way where everybody has that opportunity to see each other's perspective. And I think we've got to break down those barriers and the different silos of having different perspectives. So I think the more we can do that, the more you take away that fear and that the uncomfortable factor. You know, the more we're comfortable in hearing and being able to progress. So I think that's important too.
Thanks, Lou. Thank you for that. And I think that intergenerational civic action and learning space is such a key one, and we do it so poorly. Our school system really, you know, puts us in yearly structures that means that our young people often don't get that chance to mix in that intergenerational way. So I think that's a lovely point to end on. So we've reached 1:15, and thank you so much for taking part. And it's lovely again. You're still putting some really useful links. I keep taking photos of them that we can all benefit from, seeing what else is out there. And now the time is for us to have a bit of a break. So stretch your legs and grab a drink, and then we'll be starting back at 3:30. So thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you in person, I hope. Take care. Bye-bye.